Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of White House Down, Roland Emmerich's newest movie, which stars Channing Tatum and Jamie Foxx. Now, of all the summer blockbusters which are coming out this year, White House Down captured my interest the least. The only other rival was After Earth, but whereas After Earth just looked dull, this one looked incredibly stupid. And but what's kind of sad is I had no problem with it until they released the trailer. Honestly, I thought the project showed some promise. You know, it was directed by Roland Emmerich, who, yeah, he's the butt of many jokes, and I wouldn't call him a good director, but at least he seemed to do pretty well with action scenes. And, you know, it was starring Jamie Foxx, whom I really like, and Channing Tatum, who, even though I don't think he's a very good dramatic actor, I think he has great comic timing, and it seems like most of the projects he's been choosing really utilize that. So I was looking forward to seeing them interact, and I was expecting a big, dumb action film that would entertain me. But then I saw the trailer, and immediately it just soured my expectations. I have no problem with the absurd premise. After all, I really liked Olympus Has Fallen, and that had the exact same premise, which was terrorists taking over the White House. Nor was I annoyed by the over-the-top action set pieces that the trailer showed off. I'm a sucker for over-the-top action set pieces, even if they are CGI. I am easily entertained. But what really turned me off was the film's obnoxious sense of humor. The film was obviously aiming to be silly, but instead of being ha-ha silly, it was more silly. Whenever they would show a scene that was trying to be funny, I would just groan out loud. It made the whole film seem unwatchable to me, and I had absolutely no desire to see it. Well, White House Down had one thing going for it that After Earth did not. It was being released the same week as The Heat, which starred Melissa McCarthy. And of course, everybody knows how much I love Melissa McCarthy. I am, of course, being incredibly sarcastic. Do not take that seriously. And that looked even more unwatchable because of her presence. And, you know, say what you will about White House Down, at least it did one thing right, which was not have Melissa McCarthy. So I chose, you know, to spend my money on White House Down because I have to see something every week, and nothing else was really exciting me either. So now that I've seen the film, I can concretely say that yes, it is stupid, but it's also kind of critic-proof because it knows it's stupid. So it's really going to be difficult to describe this, because if I really try to critique it, I'm going to come across as a pretentious film snob who just can't sit back and enjoy the ride. But if I'm too easygoing, that's it. I'm going to come across as too easygoing. This movie does not deserve my praise to that extent. You know, it's not as entertaining as Fast and the Furious 6, and even though Fast and the Furious 6 was dumb, it at least really did impress me when it came to the action scenes, which is what it was going for. White House Down is more complicated than that, because I didn't think the action was that great, yet at the same time I have to admit that I did kind of enjoy it. So let me start with what this movie does right. I do believe that it was very well paced, and I'll explain why soon. But let's just say that it never goes too long without an action scene. At the same time, it never becomes exhausting because there was too much action, which automatically makes it better than Die Hard 5. So it has that going for it. And, you know, it's even more impressive when you remember that this movie is over 2 hours long. I believe it was like 2 hours and 11 minutes long. I could be wrong about that, but it never felt like that. It gets over with really quickly. The main problem is that there's nothing memorable about it. You almost feel like this is the type of movie you watch just to waste time, and you won't be annoyed, you won't be bored, but at the same time, you know, when you finish the movie, you're going to forget it almost immediately. So let me flash back a little bit. Back when I was in film school, I remember we had a debate as to who was the better, or I guess I should say worse, director, Michael Bay or Roland Emmerich. And the general consensus was that Michael Bay had more talent than Roland Emmerich. Well, and I was one of those people too. But these days I've sort of changed my views in that the problem with Michael Bay is he has talent, but unfortunately it seems like most of that talent is reserved for darker and edgier films, both as comedies or action. Unfortunately, because he's had so much success with Transformers, he is catering to expectations and is doing projects that don't really serve his talents, in my opinion. So therefore, his movies seem a lot worse for them. He needs to make something like The Rock or Pain and Gain, not Transformers 4. But he'll continue to do those because they make a shit ton of money. On the other hand, I think Roland Emmerich would have actually made a better director for the Transformers movies, and here's why. Roland Emmerich in his action films, he does a great job utilizing CGI. And yes, even though it's non-stop CGI, and as somebody who grew up with 80s movies and early 90s movies anyway, I myself tend to prefer practical effects over CGI, real stunts, real action. But still, I think Roland Emmerich does that pretty well. But and he utilizes it by having minimal editing and lots of wide shots, so he can capture all this mass destruction perfectly. Well, Michael Bay, on the other hand, relies on tighter editing, and he seems to prefer close-ups and medium shots, which does not serve CGI very well. So that's part of the reason why I don't really enjoy the Transformers movies, even when it comes to the action films. Even though he got better each movie at it, I'd still say, the action in Transformers 3 did not make up for everything else in that movie. But if Roland Emmerich had done it, the sense of humor might have been just more annoying, but I do believe that those films would have been better paced and the action scenes would have been more exciting. Whereas Michael Bay probably should have done White House Down, because it seemed like this is the type of movie that would fit his sensibilities more, because the problem with White House Down is Roland Emmerich is directing it as if he would direct a 2012 or something. He's trying to do a lot of wide shots, but there's not a whole lot of room for that in a movie that takes place in the White House. He has a lot of CGI in different areas, and CGI works when you're doing scenes like the world falling apart or whatever. But when it comes to just general explosions or gunfights or various scenes, I can't even really describe it, but it just felt out of place, and it gave the film an overly polished look that just didn't look right to me. Whereas if Michael Bay had done it, he probably would have emphasized more practical effects. And Michael Bay is just better when it comes to medium or close-ups, which is what this movie needed in terms of action. And what I will admit Roland Emmerich tried to do, he just didn't do it very well. Roland Emmerich, he probably could do an action movie like this, but the problem is even though he did Universal Soldier, which was an old-school gritty action flick, he's changed his style of filmmaking so much since then that it doesn't even matter anymore. He's gotten so used to utilizing CGI and wide shots. But where Michael Bay has always been better than Roland Emmerich is Roland Emmerich sucks when it comes to non-action scenes. This really hit the hardest in 2012, where it's like he was obviously more interested in the scenes of mass destruction, so just took your typical cliched story of father trying to make up to his kids and as they survive. That was just very cliched, very conventional, and thoroughly unwatchable. I hate those frickin' kids. Whereas Michael Bay, even if he's just relying on the actors, the Transformers is once again the only exception, because I cannot stand those movies' sense of humor. But usually, Michael Bay does a good job at getting the right kinds of actors and allowing them enough freedom to, entertain you themselves when various action scenes aren't occurring on screen. But Roland Emmerich, he really struggles with that. He did it pretty well based on memory and Independence Day, but it's been so long since I've seen that I'm not entirely sure. But I remember really enjoying Will Smith and even Jeff Goldblum and Bill Pullman. But it's I think part of the reason is he got a lot of flack for Godzilla, and Godzilla, he did try to make the characters entertaining, but they became more obnoxious for it, and it's since then he just gave up and just went bottom of the barrel cliches and relied on that. And by the way, this film also relies on some of those cliches. Channing Tatum has a troubled relationship with his daughter. Typical bullshit. But I will say this, the non-action scenes were more bearable than they were in some of his other movies, because they don't go on for too long. This movie gets started relatively quickly, and even though, yeah, there are a lot of scenes where it just slows down and focuses on the characters, it never goes on for too long, so before you start getting annoyed, it'll move on to the next action scene, which once again ties into its pacing. Now, that's not to say that I enjoyed a lot of the interactions. Once again, whenever this movie tried to be funny, it just didn't work. It seemed seemed too forced and goofy. It's strange because the script actually is sold for a shitload of money and it was a spec script, but there really wasn't any wit to the dialogue. It was just a very conventional story. Really, this screenwriter did not deserve that much money. And I, as somebody who aspires to be a screenwriter too, I'm always happy when a spec script sells that successfully. But really, he just took all of the different elements from other movies and compiled them together without making them any more clever for it. So I have no idea why he got so much here. So yeah, that is what I feel about the script. The only other thing I could say there is that I do like how they make some of the villains more humane. They have some interesting dilemmas, but otherwise they don't do enough with that to where it really matters. But I hated whenever this movie tried to be inspirational or moving. It just became incredibly cheesy, but not in an amusing kind of way, in a more, once again, groan-inducing kind of way. Whenever they'd have some speech about Abraham Lincoln, it's hard not to roll your eyes. Or whenever, there's a scene in the end, I won't spoil what exactly it is, but it involves a flag where you're just like, oh, come on. But otherwise, story-wise, you know where this movie is going to go. There's not a single twist that surprised me. I saw everything coming a mile away. So really, it relied on the action scenes, and unfortunately, Roland Emmerich is not in his element. And even though the action scenes aren't bad, I still thought the action in Olympus Has Fallen was better, primarily because the director of Olympus Has Fallen knew how to utilize what he had. In that case, he was aiming for grittier action, bloodier action, and violence, and he knew how to exploit that. Whereas Roland Emmerich is kind of fumbling around, not entirely sure how he should direct these scenes. And sometimes, yeah, there are some cool fight scenes or gun shootouts that are pretty riveting, but then there are others that fall flat just because he clearly just has no idea what he should do with them. So that's really all I have to say. Would I recommend it? I'd say it's worth a rental. This movie was definitely a solid rental because I don't believe words like harmless, goes by quickly, but you're not going to remember it. That kind of stuff isn't worth seeing in theaters. Like I said, White House Down is a good time waster. It's the type of movie that if I ever see on TV, I'll probably turn it on and enjoy myself, maybe even more then than I do now. Some movies like Sanctum and Death Race really age well under that concept. But at the same time, I don't want to go to the theaters just to waste time. I want a much better experience than this, and that is why I can't recommend you go check it out in the theaters. If you haven't seen White House Down, I still believe that is the better movie by far. That is a 3-star movie. This one's, I guess, a 2-star movie. But that is all I have. I did not do a written review, so I hope this video was enough. I did do written reviews of Dead Sushi, which is about zombie killer sushi. It is freaking amazing. A movie called Kunoichi Ninja Girl. World War Z, if you haven't seen that yet. And of course I did a Critiquing the Critics episode on Red Guy with some numbers. I can remember those numbers. So check that out if you haven't yet. That is all I've got. So I'll see you guys later.